que es la zona más sísmica, bueno, y está la mayor cantidad de problemas ahí con los edificios viejos del casco. Por el casco no.
Estoy por la zona de Campo, Avenida José Félix Sosa, al lado de la parte de atrás de...
Aquí se cayeron dos edificios, mire, al lado de la Altamira. Dios mío, el que estaba aquí en Altamira, el hotel Altamira, que tanto semáforo, se cayeron dos edificios. Dios mío, ay, tiene que haber muerto, Dios mío. Uy, no, esto fue horrible, esto fue horrible.
Rescue crews are racing against time after two powerful earthquakes struck Venezuela near the nation's capital, leaving widespread destruction behind. Officials say at least 235 people have lost their lives, while more than 1,500 others have been injured. Search teams are working non-stop, hoping to reach survivors trapped beneath collapsed buildings before it's too late. In both Caracas and the nearby coastal city of La Guaira, heartbreaking scenes are unfolding. Witnesses say they could hear people crying out for help from underneath piles of concrete and twisted metal as emergency responders searched through the debris. The disaster began when a magnitude 7.2 earthquake hit the region. Just seconds later, it was followed by an even stronger magnitude 7.5 quake. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, both earthquakes occurred at relatively shallow depths, making the shaking far more destructive and increasing the amount of damage across the affected areas. Authorities fear the death toll could continue to rise as rescue workers reach more collapsed buildings. Thousands of residents have also been left without homes, while many others are choosing to spend the night outdoors because they fear damaged buildings could collapse at any moment. The earthquake struck at approximately 6:04 p.m. local time on Wednesday, which happened to be a national holiday in Venezuela. Because many families were at home instead of at work or school, officials believe the number of people inside buildings at the time of the disaster was much higher than it would have been on a normal weekday. Experts say the first earthquake originated about 20 kilometers below the Earth's surface, while the second occurred at a depth of around 10 kilometers. Shallow earthquakes like these often produce much stronger ground shaking, leading to greater destruction. On Thursday, Jorge Rodriguez, the president of Venezuela's National Assembly, confirmed that the number of fatalities had increased. Shortly afterward, interim President Delcy Rodriguez declared a nationwide state of emergency as rescue and recovery operations continued. The international community has also begun responding. Several countries have offered assistance, and the United States has announced approximately $150 million in emergency aid. U.S. military transport aircraft and ships are being deployed to help move rescue teams, equipment, and humanitarian supplies into the affected region as quickly as possible. Officials estimate that around 250 buildings have either been heavily damaged or completely destroyed, with much of the devastation concentrated in La Guaira. Verified video from the area showed what was once a 10-story hotel reduced to nothing more than a massive pile of rubble. Families gathered near the collapsed buildings on Thursday, desperately searching for relatives and friends. One resident, Juan Ortiz, told reporters that one of his close friends had already been confirmed dead. Another friend was still believed to be trapped beneath the debris, while roughly 20 people he personally knew from the coastal community remained unaccounted for. Ortiz described the emotional toll of the disaster, saying he felt shocked, overwhelmed, and frustrated because there was little he could do to help those still trapped. The destruction wasn't limited to the coast. In Caracas, a medical student reported that multiple buildings had also collapsed across the capital. Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello said several other states, including Trujillo, Yaracuy, Carabobo, Aragua, and Miranda, also experienced significant damage from the powerful shaking. In the Chacao district, which is part of the Greater Caracas metropolitan area, Mayor Gustavo Duque provided an update outside one of the collapsed buildings. He said 11 people had died at that location, while rescue crews had successfully pulled 23 survivors from the rubble. Speaking in a video shared on social media, the mayor explained that emergency workers were carefully removing debris so specialized rescue teams could safely enter the site and continue searching for anyone who might still be alive beneath the wreckage. He said the team's highest priority was saving as many lives as possible before time ran out. The earthquakes also caused major damage to Venezuela's main international airport located outside Caracas. Authorities have temporarily closed the airport after parts of the terminal suffered structural damage. Video recorded inside the building showed dust pouring from the ceiling as pieces of debris fell onto the floor, highlighting the powerful impact of the earthquakes. One of the hardest hit areas was located about 155 miles or roughly 250 kilometers northwest of Caracas. Verified footage from the coastline showed a multi-story building believed to be a hotel collapsing into a massive pile of rubble. The images quickly spread across social media, highlighting the devastating impact of the earthquakes. The danger didn't end after the initial shaking. More than 30 aftershocks have been recorded since the two major earthquakes struck, keeping residents on edge and making rescue operations even more dangerous for emergency crews. Speaking on Venezuela's state television network, interim president Delcy Rodriguez warned that the number of people killed is expected to increase as search teams continue reaching collapsed buildings and isolated communities. The U.S. Geological Survey also warned that the disaster could become even more severe. Based on its rapid assessment models, the agency said widespread destruction and a high number of casualties were likely across the affected region. According to the USGS's analysis, there was an estimated 42% probability that the final death toll could exceed 10,000 people. The agency also calculated a 33% chance that fatalities could rise beyond 100,000 under the worst-case scenario. Officials stressed that these figures are not forecasts or confirmed estimates. Instead, they are emergency planning models designed to help governments and humanitarian organizations prepare for the possible scale of the disaster. These estimates are based on information gathered from previous earthquakes with similar magnitudes, depths, and locations, along with population density and other scientific factors. The actual number of casualties will depend on many variables that continue to change as rescue efforts move forward. Experts say several additional factors influence the final impact of an earthquake, including the strength of local buildings, construction standards, how close communities are to the epicenter, and even the time of day the shaking occurs. Venezuela sits along the boundary where two major tectonic plates meet. Scientists believe the earthquakes were triggered when stress built up between those plates was suddenly released, causing the powerful shaking felt across the region. Journalist Luis Hernandez, reporting from Caracas, told BBC Newsday that determining the full extent of the damage remains extremely difficult. Widespread power outages and internet disruptions are limiting communication, making it harder for officials to gather accurate information from affected areas. He explained that Venezuela's ongoing economic challenges have also complicated emergency response efforts, saying it remains very difficult to understand the true scale of the disaster while so many communities remain disconnected. Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello said some of the worst damage in Caracas were concentrated in the Altamira and Los Palos Grandes neighborhoods. These same communities were also heavily affected during the devastating 1967 earthquake that struck the Venezuelan capital and claimed around 200 lives. According to records from the U.S. Geological Survey, the second earthquake is believed to be the strongest to hit Venezuela in more than a century, making it one of the country's most significant seismic events since 1900. Residents described terrifying moments as buildings shook violently. BBC Mundo journalist Nicole Colster, who lives on the 7th floor of an apartment building in Los Palos Grandes, said it was the strongest earthquake she had ever experienced. She recalled believing that the entire building might collapse around her as the violent shaking continued, describing the experience as one of the most frightening moments of her life.
The powerful earthquakes were felt far beyond Venezuela's borders. Reports from neighboring Colombia said residents in the capital city of Bogotá, hundreds of kilometers away, also experienced noticeable shaking, demonstrating just how massive the seismic event truly was. Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado shared a heartfelt message on social media, saying her thoughts and prayers were with every family affected by the devastating earthquakes. She expressed support for those facing unimaginable loss and hardship as rescue efforts continued across the country. The disaster has also become the first major challenge in the evolving relationship between Venezuela and the United States. Earlier this year, President Donald Trump announced a dramatic shift in U.S. policy after ordering the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Following the earthquakes, Trump said he had directed his administration to prepare an immediate humanitarian response. In a post on Truth Social, Trump described the earthquakes as catastrophic, saying they had caused widespread destruction and a tragic loss of life. He added that the United States was fully prepared to assist Venezuela with emergency aid and disaster relief efforts. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also confirmed that the U.S. was quickly mobilizing search and rescue teams, medical personnel, emergency supplies, and humanitarian assistance to support those affected by the disaster. The Trump administration has worked to reshape its approach towards Venezuela after the removal of Maduro, while strengthening support for the country's interim leadership under Delcy Rodriguez. The earthquakes now present the first major international test of that changing relationship. Meanwhile, heartbreaking rescue scenes continued to unfold across the disaster zone. Survivors were pulled from collapsed buildings covered in dust, cuts, and blood. Among those rescued were young children, while emergency crews also worked to save trapped pets and other animals buried beneath the rubble. State television broadcast dramatic footage showing rescue workers freeing a woman who had been pinned beneath a massive concrete slab. At first, only one of her bare feet was visible beneath the debris, but after an intense effort, rescuers successfully brought her out alive. Outside the capital, however, many residents said they saw very few official rescue teams arriving during the critical early hours after the disaster. In several communities, neighbors were forced to organize their own search efforts using whatever tools they could find. In Caracas, Diana Delgado, a mother of 3, questioned why the heavy equipment promised by authorities had not yet reached her neighborhood. She said local residents, not government crews, were doing the dangerous work of digging through collapsed buildings. Desperately searching for answers, Delgado said she still had no information about her 8-year-old son. She did not know whether he was trapped beneath the rubble, taken to a shelter, or somewhere else entirely. Across the affected region, scenes of grief became increasingly difficult to watch. One devastated mother collapsed in tears after the bodies of her 3-year-old and 10-year-old children were recovered, wrapped in blankets, and carried away by emergency workers. Nearby, desperate relatives continued calling out the names of missing family members, hoping someone would answer. Others stood silently among the ruins, unable to process the scale of the tragedy unfolding around them. The coastal state of La Guaira, just north of Caracas, suffered some of the worst destruction and the highest number of casualties. The region is also home to Venezuela's main international airport, which remains closed after sustaining significant structural damage, making it even more difficult for aid and rescue supplies to reach those in need. Retired schoolteacher Juan Alberto Mendano described the emotional moment he experienced while walking through the devastated streets of La Guaira. After passing the body of one victim, he noticed a woman trapped beneath the rubble who was desperately waving her hand in hopes someone would see her. He said hearing her cries was heartbreaking because there was little anyone nearby could do without heavy rescue equipment. All they could do was pray that professional crews would reach her in time. When the earthquakes first struck, thousands of people rushed out of swaying buildings in fear as the ground shook violently beneath them. By Thursday morning, many residents returned to find entire neighborhoods transformed into fields of destruction. Buildings that had once stood proudly were now little more than empty concrete shells. Furniture hung dangerously from broken windows, while helicopters circled overhead, searching for survivors and assessing the damage from above. In La Guaira, resident Christian Carreno stared at what remained of his apartment building, now leaning dangerously after being damaged by fire and the earthquakes. He said he had lost everything he owned. Even more painful, he feared that some of his neighbors were still trapped inside the unstable structure, unable to escape before it partially collapsed.
As night fell in downtown Caracas, hundreds of people chose not to return to home. Instead, families gathered in parks, parking lots, and other open spaces, too frightened to sleep inside buildings that might collapse during another aftershock. Maria Cristina Diaz, a 41-year-old janitor, said her family spent the entire night outside because they feared the buildings around them were no longer safe. Like thousands of others, they waited in uncertainty, hoping the worst was finally over, while rescue crews continued their desperate search for survivors.